typically where you have all the gifts wrapped up and under the tree for you, right? On Christmas Eve, you start thinking about everything that you've got to not unpack, but open up and unwrap, and you're super excited about it because everything is right there. All the gifts are right there before you, right? But by the way, I don't know if Eddie's in charge of this or not, but the lights in here have never been brighter. Did you notice that?
Yeah, they are.
It's
the right switch is
here.
off of the left switch.
I'll fix
it's
that.
elevated.
Give me a second.
Man, I'll bet on the YouTube where our numbers have increased because of the sleek sexiness that is me. I will bet you that I look like nothing more than right now just
You
a
look
bright
radiant.
light bulb.
Radiant.
Honestly, I probably just look like I look like that fella from the Hale Bop Comet videos. Doe. There we go. Now the lights are completely off.
There we go.
But here's the thing. It is not Christmas, but rather Thanksgiving Eve. And on this Thanksgiving Eve, literally, we are sitting here with just a mountain of gifts to unwrap today. The number of things that we have to talk about today is just a smorgasbord before us. We have the buffet. You've got the turkey, which are the Colts. That's your mainstay. Everybody knows this time of year the NFL is the main course, right?
Always.
But then you have that dish that has always been there, and you're like, hey, everybody likes this dish, and sometimes we provide more of it than others. That will be your green bean casserole, let's say. That'd be your IU basketball. They're in action today. We shouldn't remind people of that because we want them listening to this program, although they would be listening to our sister station, so that's fine.
Feast week.
Then you have somebody that always brings like a new dessert. You're like, did you hear? Aunt Libby brought this new dessert. We haven't had it before. It's kind of a peach cobbler, but it's got like some different crumbles to it. She's tried a new recipe, and everybody tries it and goes, this is tremendous. This is a new tradition, but I think this is a tradition now. That's your Indiana football.
That's a dangerous game, by the way.
Which we have in discussion for the playoffs today.
I don't want to be that person that's bringing the new dish because you're right. Sometimes you get that reaction, but other times you're like, oh, Aunt Karen, this is great.
Well, now that would be the Colts tight end discussion, right?
Yeah.
Where you've got to go through the motions, but everybody's like, this is actually terrible. Okay?
Where's the dog?
That's right. But there is still, there's a ton to talk about. Then you have also, your rolls and pumpkin pie, which are just staples, and everybody likes them. And that's the Pacers in action tonight, taking on, I believe, the Blazers, correct, Eddie?
Yes, the Trailblazers.
Which that alone is kind of cool when it's always fun when they take on a team that you see once a year. And the Blazers just have cool uniforms.
Oh, yeah.
They're just kind of a cool – I've always thought of Portland as just kind of a cool franchise. But there's plenty to get to today, and we thank you for tuning in on this Thanksgiving Eve. We'll actually talk a little Thanksgiving over the course of today, but there's a lot more to get to. My name is Jake Query. Jimmy Cook, the voice you just heard. Eddie Garrison, who, if you have not noticed, based on his increased – I don't know if I could say it – his increased OCD vernacular, working under the shadows of Mark Boyle on a regular basis as the producer for Pacers Radio. That would be why he insists on saying things like Trailblazers and Zero, right? It rubs off on you. That's fine.
No, they're the Trailblazers, Jake. They're not the Blazers. That was me being me.
What do their jerseys say?
Trailblazers.
They
Portland.
say Blazers. They have jerseys that say Blazers. Look up Clyde Drexler. I bet he's wearing one that just says Blazers. What do you call them, Jimmy? I call
generally,
both, right?
Generally, I feel like I say Trailblazers more than Blazers, but I'm also team shorten things, so I'm not going to pick a fight with you on shortening things. I call the Pacers the Sirs. What are you going to do?
The Trailblazers and Blazers is like 50-50, right?
Yeah, I would agree.
Trailblazers is cool. And their logo's awesome.
Logo's awesome. Uniforms are great. Nothing wrong with Portland.
But let's begin with this. Last night, there was a lot going on last night, but, of course, 8 o'clock. I'm like, all right, 8 o'clock. I'm all dialed in. I'm going to tune in to the college football playoff unveiling and the like cool little violin music they play in the background, which is just 3 chords for 35 consecutive minutes, which is suspenseful and cool until your brain picks up that it's just the same 3 chords, and then you go crazy on it. There's my OCD for you, Eddie. But, of course, it was not at 8 o'clock. He had to wait till the end of the game that was being played. I can't remember which game was being played at that point.
I was going to say it felt later than last week. That's why,
like
the games. Okay, that makes sense.
But Indiana, to me, and it's a little bit confusing because you see Indiana when they unveil the rankings, and I believe ranking-wise they were 10th. So you think they're in. They're in, right? But yet they're not necessarily totally in because you have teams behind them that are not in the rankings, but one of them is going to get the auto because of winning the Big 12. So that slides everybody down a spot. Clemson, for example, is 12, and you think, oh, Clemson made it in because it's a 12-team playoff. But again, one of those spots is reserved for the winner of the Big 12 Conference, and all of those that are vying for that spot are outside the top 12 right now. So somebody's going to crash that party and boot somebody out. Somebody's going to be standing in the reception hall of the party thinking that they're in when they're about to close the doors, and all of a sudden some guy's going to come in with a badge around his neck going, well, somebody's got to leave. Well, what do you mean? Like, we all had invites. Well, I know, but I got an automatic invite, so the last person in has to leave. I think Indiana is pretty safe, and I'll tell you why. If you look at the teams that are ranked ahead of Indiana, and you look at the fate, and this is all under the assumption, which I realize assumptions can be dangerous. But when you look at the fact that Indiana concludes with Purdue in the bucket game Saturday night at Memorial Stadium, it is very hard to imagine that Indiana does not win that game and probably win it decisively. Although, one variable would be this. Indiana's kind of a fast turf team. Indiana's a quick rhythm, slant pass, quick motion. I know they can grind it on the ground. They do a really good job with that. But for the most part, I think they rely on a fast, just their speed as more so than their strength. And maybe because that game's going to be 20 degrees and the weather might be kind of nasty, that brings a little bit of that variable down for them. But it's still hard to imagine that they don't beat Purdue, and probably soundly, although maybe the margin of victory won't be as big. But if you look at the teams ahead of Indiana, okay, Boise State is just behind them. Now, Boise State still has to play Oregon State. Probably Boise State wins that game. But that's not necessarily the kind of game that's going to, like, catapult Boise State. But aren't they – Eddie, explain for me, please, one of the two of you, because I get confused by this. The non-Power 4 Boise State does have a caveat, right? Because they are the highest-ranked team that is not one of the Power 4 conferences. That means what, Jimmy?
Right, so the Power 4 conferences and then the highest-ranked group of 5 conference winner get the buys that are reserved for conference champions. And how the buys are divvied up, get the auto bids to the playoff. Those then comes with first-round buys. The teams that get the first-round buys of the Power 4s that you just mentioned and the highest-ranked group of 5 conference winner, the best-ranked teams of those 5, they get the first 4 buys. And the last one is left out in the first round. So they have to play an extra game.
So Boise State,
yes,
because of the fact that they are well ahead of, Tulane is 6 spots behind them.
Correct.
So Boise State, by all accounts, so long as they beat Oregon State, they punch a ticket because they will be the highest-ranked non-Power 4.
Correct,
right?
And they have a better ranking than Arizona State, the projected Big 12 champions. That's why they get the bye, and Arizona State is forced to play a first-round game.
Gotcha. Now, the other teams that are there in the category with Indiana, you've got Tennessee, who still has Vanderbilt to play. Now, that's a little bit tricky. I think Tennessee's really good. But one thing we know, and that's not necessarily – I know that people are going to be like, that's a big rivalry game. Is it? I mean, is Tennessee really considered – Tennessee's rival is probably Alabama, right? Or Georgia or whatever. I don't know that they think of Vanderbilt as their rival. But nonetheless, Vanderbilt, we know, is slightly tricky. If Tennessee loses, they're out.
Correct.
But they are ahead of Indiana. Georgia taking on Georgia Tech. Georgia right now is sitting at 7. Georgia's theoretically in very, very good shape at 7. But if they lose that game, excuse me, I don't know why I have a frog in my throat. If Georgia loses that game, they're out, right? They've got to be.
So if they, Eddie, correct me if I'm wrong on this, if they lose this weekend, are they then out? Haven't they already clinched a spot in the SEC title game?
Yes.
So that
well,
changes
they could
the map.
still win the SEC title.
Because then maybe you're looking at them as a bid stealer at that point. I don't know.
Well, if
they drop this weekend.
If Georgia loses, then you've got to pray that they win the SEC and that they, right? Because otherwise, I'm sorry. If Georgia loses, you got to pray they lose the SEC because they'd be out.
Correct.
Then they'd have 4 losses.
Correct.
There's no way they're in.
Yes.
Right?
Correct.
And then you have the other curveball, which I can't imagine this is going to take place. What if Notre Dame loses to USC?
That opens up another spot. I saw there's a lot of people. I understand that we joke because I have the reversible jacket with pride, and so I see into and talk about both fan bases, Notre Dame and IU football. There's some Notre Dame fans that seem to think they're going to get in with 2 losses. I'm sorry. At that point, the NIU loss gets too wonky. There's no shot.
Actually, here's a question for you.
Sure.
We might have misspoke.
Sure.
Boise State, as we talked about being in that team, right?
Right.
Is Notre Dame listed as an ACC team?
No. Are you asking in terms of could they get a bye or not?
Well, no. What I'm saying is, wouldn't Notre Dame be the one? Doesn't Notre Dame go ahead of Boise State?
No, because
they're not a
conference.
Yeah, they're not a conference champion.
They're an independent. Okay, I see what you're
right.
saying. Yeah.
Correct. Good question, but no, they're not tied with that. Yeah, if Notre Dame loses to USC, they're out. There's no.
Yeah, I would agree.
There's no
with that.
pathway for them. Like, look, I'm one of the biggest Irish homers around.
The
We
other
get
thing,
Kevin Bowen on the phone. They're not getting in with 2 losses.
Here's the thing about Notre Dame. And listen, I'm not a fan of Notre Dame, but I will admit that this becomes a factor for Notre Dame. Notre Dame is in, don't get me wrong. But if Notre Dame puts himself in position in this system where they need benefit of doubt, they're not going to get it because benefit of doubt would come by being in a conference, and the committee and college football want them in a conference. They are going to penalize them for being independent as much as they can.
I'll push against you a little bit on that. It's a fair concern, but they have, I can't remember who it is, but they have somebody in that committee room to begin with, number one. That's part of the reason why they were all for, and Jack Swarbrick was all for expansion of the playoff, and that's why they re-upped their contract with NBC. They feel comfortable where they're at. I think it's a fair point to bring up. I don't think it winds up really mattering.
Well, but what I'm saying is if they have 2 losses, they're going to say to them, hey, listen, the way that you can get a final push with 2 losses is if you are in a conference.
I think it just depends who you lose to.
As an established conference member, and you're not. And so they would penalize them.
I think it just depends on who you lose to. You can't lose to NIU.
There is zero question that college football would prefer Notre Dame to be in a conference.
They definitely would, but
right.
I think we're past that point. They've solidified themselves at NBC, and they have a seat at the table for the committee. If that was going to happen, it would have happened by now.
Yeah, I understand that. And that's what I'm saying, Jimmy. That's why they're going to continually be penalized for it if that's the last push that they need.
I think it just varies who the 2 losses are. You can't lose to NIU and be a 2-loss team with Notre Dame's schedule.
And I'm saying this year, one of those losses is Northern Illinois. Thus, if they put themselves in position with the second loss where they need benefit of the doubt, they're not going to get it because they're not in a conference.
No, they're not going to get it because they lost to NIU. They're not going to get it because they lost to the 7th-ranked team in the MAC, not because they're not a part of the Big Ten.
Okay, what I'm saying to you is I will die on this hill.
Okay, I know that's fine.
I will die on the hill.
We're pretty clear where we are.
I will die on the hill that the college football committee and the college football in general, the conferences of college football, they have surrendered themselves to the fact that Notre Dame doesn't need to be in a conference, okay? Doesn't mean that they wouldn't like them to be. Because of Notre Dame's brand, they would love for Notre Dame to be in a conference. But because Notre Dame is not officially in a conference, anytime, and it might be 1 out of 1,000 times. It may only be 1 out of the next 35 years. But any time that there is a situation where being in a conference would be an asset to Notre Dame and it would be a tiebreaker for Notre Dame, the committee is going to hold it against them that they're not in a conference because they so vehemently have wanted them to be in one.
They already have a penalty built in. This was negotiated when they set up the 12-team playoff. The penalty that will always be given to them year in and year out is they never are eligible for a bye. That is already the penalty they're paying for not being in a conference. I'm not saying, Jake, that it won't be a factor. I don't think it's going to be a big of a factor as teams pointed it out to, or people pointed it out to be in the 4-team playoff because they are already penalizing themselves. Hey, we're independent. That's fine. We can never get that first-round bye. We're always going to have to play an extra game. If they're on the shelf any year, I don't think it's going to be because of a conference so much so is who did you lose to twice? And it can't be the 7th-ranked team in the MAC. It just can't. That can't happen.
Which also would come into play that that a committee would say, you know what, losing to the 7th-ranked team in the Big Ten is less egregious than losing to the 7th.
Well, sure. Don't get me wrong. I'm not downplaying the benefits of conference. I don't think in a 12-team playoff that's as big of a penalty for Notre Dame as it was in a 4-team. I'm not saying it's not a factor. They built in the rules knowing we can never get a first-round bye, but now a 2-loss Notre Dame is more likely to get in than they ever were in the 4-team playoff. They are not more likely to get in this year because they lost to freaking NIU. You just can't overcome
that. It is amazing that they lost second, and they're not going to lose to USC.
I don't think they are. No,
but here's the thing: if they lose to USC, I don't think that they wouldn't get in at that point. Primarily because they would have USC would be a bad loss.
Yeah, it would.
I mean, that team's bad, which is incredible, right?
There's already people that are pointing, rightfully so. I get it. Why is a 1-loss Notre Dame team that lost NIU out of? Well, they've done the same thing they're telling everybody else to do. They've blown the doors off of every opponent they've played. We were all having these fantasies of Army and Navy making the playoff, and Notre Dame ran them out of the field in both those matchups.
Navy has completely
what
you want. It's irrelevant now, but for any team that has Navy on their schedule that was hoping, if we can beat Navy, that's going to be a good win for us. Once Navy lost, the wheels came off.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've looked at their year, but they've lost like 3 or 4 now, and they just got beat 35-0 by who? Tulane.
Yep. If you're chalking it up, that's
Tulane.
Nice,
that's right.
Nice. If you're chalking it up, that all those losses happened after the loss to Notre Dame, for what that's worth.
Colts in action, of course, on Sunday. Listen, speaking of games you can't lose, this is one of them, right?
Yes. Regardless of what your injury report status is, you don't lose to the hapless New England Patriots as they currently stand.
It is so odd to me how relative sports are. Because the New England Patriots went from being, you couldn't, it's kind of funny because even during the Patriots dynasty, like the Chiefs are currently in a dynasty. And nationally speaking, the Chiefs feel like they're kind of sexy. Their tight end is dating the biggest pop culture superstar in the world. Their quarterback plays with like this exciting, you never know what's going to happen, throwing it behind his back level of play. Their coach looks like a caricature of a walrus and is this offensive guru, and they just keep putting in different guys that are 5'10" and come out of nowhere and put up 170-yard games.
Fumble risky.
Well done.
They have a motif about them,
sure.
right? There's something about them that's cool and sleek. The Patriots, and I think part of it is when the Patriots rebranded and they came out with these helmets that look like they were from the USFL, and it's always gray and cloudy where they're playing, and their tight end is kind of equally as boorish as Travis Kelce, but he's not,
he's a party boy. People love him.
We have found out since then Gronkowski's an extremely likable dude.
Right, yeah.
He played the part perfectly.
Incredible post-career launch to get back into who he really was.
But when he was a player, he was, public enemy number one, right? And it goes without saying then their quarterback, was just not likable, right? Their head coach, instead of being a fun walrus-type caricature, was this gruff slob that nobody liked, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as New England fell out of favor, they were like persona non grata. Literally, they had no staying power as a chic franchise at all.
You know what's funny to that point? Like, what you're referring to is they didn't become the Cowboys. Like, we still give all these accolades and love to Dallas
exactly correct.
Years after they've done anything,
correct.
But New England didn't get that.
Correct, because the Cowboys have, honestly, I know it's as simple as this. The Cowboys had, they're in their prime, regardless of which age group you are, their players were sexy.
Yeah.
Tony Dorsett was sleek and cool. Troy Aikman was a good-looking dude. Michael Irvin was flashy. Emmitt Smith was had a great smile and was a likable guy and was just a workhorse running back. And they have beautiful silver helmets with a blue star. They had a TV show in the 70s with a theme song that showed in the opening credits the stadium itself. Everything about them was sexy and cool and chic. Whereas, and that's kind of how Kansas City on a much lesser scale is, the Patriots, literally, nothing about them was sexy. Nothing. Tom Brady could have been, but he was unlikable, right?
Yeah.
And then Deflategate and everything else.
Winning is sexy,
it's
but it
amazing to
eventually
me how
stops.
you hear nothing about New England. I mean, literally, this is New England now is it's almost like it's not. I don't mean a buy in terms of like you're going to win, but it's a buy of interest. Nobody's like, oh man, can't wait to watch the Patriots game. What?
Yeah, and they didn't keep any staying power in division. Like once the Brady era ended, the Josh Allen ascension happened, and now it's Buffalo's division. You don't think of the East as
you've seen
New
Good Will
England's
Hunting,
division.
right?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay, in Good Will Hunting, Will and so Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. I don't remember Ben Affleck's character's name, but they're sitting there at the construction site smoking cigarettes. They're 25 years old, and Ben Affleck is trying to tell Matt Damon about how, look, you've got a golden ticket here with your intellect. Like, what are you doing here working construction with us? And Matt Damon says, nah, I mean, like, I look around, I think about, like, when we're going to be sitting around to be 50, like, go to the Patriots game, go down and watch our kids play. And Ben Affleck's like, are you kidding me?
Chucky.
Yeah, Chucky's like, Chuck, I had a double burger. Chuck's like, are you kidding me? Like, you got to get out of here. Now, when you're watching that movie in 1993, you think that he's saying you got to get out of here because he's looking into the future and seeing the world at the fingertips of Will. But really what he's saying is, look, I'm looking into the future, and like Drake May's our freaking quarterback, okay? Like, you can't be around here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you got to get out of here. We're not going to be watching the Patriots. The Patriots are going to suck. We're going to be down watching the Celtics. Like that, you know what I mean? Like he knew that the Patriots are going to be irrelevant. Even Chucky knew that. And all Chucky was worried about was who was going to be riding shotgun when they took work at the construction site.
Don't lose to the irrelevant team.
Big show lined up today, by the way. Speaking of the irrelevant team, is Purdue that for Indiana in the bucket game? There is some relevance for the Boilermakers. We'll talk to Sam King, who was the Purdue beat writer for the Lafayette Courier and Journal. He's going to join us next. Ken Dilger on the program today. We're going to see if he can line up at tight end for the Colts. But we're also going to talk about his alma mater playing for a state championship this weekend and get his thoughts on the Colts showdown in New England. Of course, Ken, not only a former Colt tight end, but also a part of Wish TV's Countdown to Kickoff. He will join us on the program at 1 o'clock. Casey Vallier today also, and Matt Weaver talking the IU side of things. So a loaded program today. A reminder, by the way, yesterday I had to go in and I had a little leak in my tire. Went in there and had to get that taken care of. And knowing that I'm getting ready to take a road trip next weekend for the weekend, not I'm going to miss any time, but I said, hey, you guys want to go ahead and just check my oil and make sure everything's good there as well? Because that's what you get from Jiffy Lube. Your one-stop shop when it comes to your vehicle maintenance needs. And Jiffy Lube now until the end of the year, all of the Central Indiana Jiffy Lubes, if you are a member of a monthly car wash program, point that out to a Jiffy Lube team member when you pull in, and guess what? $20 off a signature service oil change and a free tire rotation is what you're going to get, all because they know if you care how your car looks, they want to make sure that they are taking care of how your car runs. At every Jiffy Lube here in Central Indiana from now until the end of the year, Jiffy Lube, your one-stop vehicle maintenance shopping where you never need an appointment. Bucket game, appointment viewing, coming up on Saturday night at Memorial Stadium in Bloomington. For Purdue, does it mean an appointment for the sign of a change? We'll find out exactly that from Sam King next. Indiana's college football playoff chances are living on a prayer because right now it looks like they're in, but there's a lot going on around them. By the way, several people pointed out to me, Jimmy, you might have pointed this out before we get to Sam, and I will admit, I am the first to admit it is confusing to me. The Power Four conferences do not get automatic entry over a bye in the college football playoff. It's the top four conference winners in the college football playoff standings that get a bye, with the next highest ranked conference winner getting in also. So in other words,
Correct.
if you were to win a conference, that does not automatically secure you as
Correct.
As a bye.
This is the part where I get confused even. I believe the Power Fours, though, are still auto bids. Like for example, Tulane cannot usurp Georgia. Like, I think the SEC
Tulane.
is. It said it right that time, yeah?
I don't believe that's correct, Jimmy.
Am I wrong? No, am I wrong on that?
But here,
Okay.
it is my understanding that the four byes are secured for the four highest-ranked conference champions, regardless of conference.
Okay.
So if Tulane, for example, was to – now, this is not going to be the case this year. But if Tulane, for whatever reason, was to win their conference and as a result find themselves ranked 6th, and Georgia was to win the SEC but was ranked 13th, they would get in over Georgia because they are a higher ranked. If it came down to those two teams, they are the higher ranking, and they both are conference champions.
Okay.
So the Power –
For some reason, I had thought the Power was immune to that, and the group of five were the teams competing for that distinction.
It confuses
but maybe
the hell
I'm
out
wrong.
of me, to be honest with you. But at any rate, joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that confusing clarification or none thereof, on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, he is with the Lafayette Journal and Courier. I think I said Courier and Journal. I screw that up all the time because of the Louisville newspaper. Another Freudian slip in the mind of Jake Query. But Lafayette Journal and Courier is where you can find Sam King's work. He's a return guest on the show. Sam, I appreciate the time. Let's get right to this. Is this the final game in terms of the bucket game for Ryan Walters?
Based on just the hearsay and things around, I don't think so. Now, if Purdue goes out and loses 49-0 or something, that could change things. I think Purdue certainly has to show some competitive fire, which it's done at times this year, but maybe for like a half of a game. You think the second half at Illinois, the second half at Michigan State last Friday, the first half against Nebraska, and then the second half against Northwestern. But Purdue hasn't done that for a full game yet. And, you know, if you're the head coach of a football team and you're an administrator making a decision on whether that coach comes back, especially after a 1-11 season, you want to say, like, hey, this thing looks like it could trend in the right direction. And, you know, funny enough, I wrote the other day that a year ago after the bucket game, it looked like two programs trended in different directions, and it was. It's just not the way that maybe a lot of people probably thought.
This is such an elementary question, I guess, because sometimes these things are more intricate than they appear. But, Sam, if you had, let's say for the sake of argument, Sam King, our guest who covers Purdue, if indeed they do not make a coaching change, what would be in your opinion, the biggest reason? Would it be money, or would it be still belief in a young coach that needs support around him that would be the number one reason that Mike Babinski decides not to make that change?
In this day and age, the money's going to be there. I mean, we saw what Indiana did last year with Tom Allen, and that was a much higher buyout than what Purdue's sitting on right now if it makes a change. I think if Ryan Walters comes back, you're going to see an overhauled staff, probably more money invested in that staff because right now Purdue has $5.5 million, I think it is, tied to 10 assistants and a strength coach, which is low for a Big Ten school or any school in a power conference. So if you do bring him back, I think I know this has been a while, but I talked to Mike Babinski in the offseason, the Purdue athletic director, and he said that, he was more confident than ever in Ryan Walters, despite coming off a 4-8 season. Now, that might change after going 1-11. Presumably, we're going to just say that Purdue isn't going to win this game on Saturday. So I don't know, but I do think as of right now, it sounds like Ryan Walters will be the head coach next year with some new pieces below him on the staff.
Isn't there concern in today's era, Sam, that if Ryan Walter, really regardless, I mean, I guess maybe this might be a damned if you do and damned if you don't scenario, but what about roster and attrition of the roster and not only decommits, but also the transfer portal? How much will that also negatively impact Purdue possibly for next year?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the case even, winning programs. You're getting 30-plus players in the portal, it seems like, every single year. That can be to your benefit, and it can be, it can work against you as well. Now, the best players on Purdue's team, and I don't want to speculate or anything like that, I'm sure have already been reached out by larger schools or schools that are winning or whatever it might be. That was the case last year. It's going to be the case next year, and even, probably situations going on at Indiana and Georgia and every other program in the country. But, yeah, I think that last year Purdue had some guys that stuck around based on loyalty and belief that this thing was working and going to be a much better season this year. And it hasn't been. So does that change their opinions a year later if they still have eligibility? I don't know. But I imagine there's going to be some money and some other things thrown at some of these guys. It already has impacted recruiting. We've seen 4 or 5 guys now who were originally committed to Purdue and were high-end commits, like some of the top targets that Purdue had, decommit and either commit elsewhere or just go through the recruiting process. So we'll know more in the coming weeks if Ryan Walters is around, because this is a small signing class as of now. But also you can turn your program around pretty quickly through the portal. As we saw, I know that Curt Cignetti brought a bunch of guys with him from his previous job, which helps. But if you get the right guys in and a bunch of them, you can turn the program around. And I know that that's something that Ryan Walters wholeheartedly believes, like, hey, this thing isn't broken because we now have addressed where we're weak and we can go out in the portal and get guys. That said, the guys that came through the portal last year didn't really pan out the way that a lot of people probably thought they would this season.
Talking all things Purdue with Sam King, covers them for the Lafayette Journal and Courier. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Sam, I know you mentioned and already highlighted once the piece that you wrote on the Journal and Courier earlier this week regarding the different directions these two programs were perceivably heading last year when Purdue beats IU in the bucket game, and it went the opposite way they thought it was going to go. For Indiana, I think this is another opportunity to run up the score, to make a statement to the committee, and Curt Cignetti to deliver on his promise of Purdue sucks, all that good stuff. Notre Dame beat Purdue 66-7 earlier this year. If we get a margin like that, does that impact at all the conversations with it being Indiana, with that trajectory that went opposite ways in the front of everybody's mind? Does that impact anything administratively from Purdue for Ryan Walters' job security if they get their doors blown off?
I don't know for certain, but I would think so. And I asked Jason Simmons, who is the interim offensive coordinator for Purdue right now, earlier this week. And he has a son who's a walk-on on Indiana's team, and he's been a high school coach in Indianapolis area for a long time. And I said, is it magnified what's happening at Purdue based on what's happening at Indiana? And he said, we would be naive not to think that, the perception is, oh, you're a one-win team and you're looking 2 hours away, and there's a program that completely flipped itself upside down in a year and is having a dream season. So I think, that probably weighs heavily, especially on the fans. I don't know how much on the administration, but yeah, Purdue's had, I guess, the unfortunate situation of now you're facing Indiana coming off a loss. You were facing Notre Dame coming off a loss to Northern Illinois. You were facing Ohio State coming off a loss to Oregon. So the best teams on your schedule were all coming off a loss and came out with, perceivably having a point to prove the next week against the team that talent-wise can't match up. So I think this is going to be Indiana running up the score type situation because now Indiana is kind of on the fringe of making the playoff and really feels like it has to go out and demolish a team that pretty much every other team in the playoffs that has played Purdue has done. So you've got to make that statement and put up a lot of points, make this thing out of reach early.
Okay, if Purdue is able to pull off the upset, if Purdue is able to stun the world and bounce Indiana out of the college football playoff, if Purdue's able to go down in the cold, under the lights, win the bucket game in Bloomington, it's going to be because they did what, Sam? And don't say score more points.
No, it's going to have to be kind of score more points, but do it early. Purdue has struggled in the first quarter. I'm not understating that in any way. The only touchdown Purdue has in the first quarter all season is against Indiana State, and that's the lone touchdown in the first quarter this year. Purdue has played from behind the entire season, and it cannot do that. I think that, interesting stat, talking with Nathan Baird the other day, and we were both blown away to hear this. Purdue's offense has not taken the field with a lead against an FBS team. Every time that Purdue took a lead in a game, the defense gave that lead right back. So that's baffling. Like, you've been playing from behind now for 10 straight weeks, it seems like. So I think Purdue would have to get off to a good start early and get some momentum. And just for whatever reason, it doesn't do that. And that's why, you can applaud these second half comebacks and making some of these games interesting. But mistakes in the first half have killed Purdue numerous times that if those didn't happen, we're probably talking about a completely different situation right now for Purdue, where there's 4 or 5 wins on the schedule, perhaps.
Sam King covers Purdue for the Lafayette Journal and Courier. That's where you can read all of his coverage leading up to the Bucket game, and depending on what happens in Bloomington, perhaps coverage even more so. Obviously, you'll want to read it anyway, but maybe storylines coming out of Purdue in the immediacy following. We shall see what does happen. Sam, appreciate the time as always. Have a happy Thanksgiving, all right?
Thanks. You guys too. Appreciate it.
Thanksgiving weekend upon us. That means high school football as well. We'll get into, from Jimmy and Eddie, what games they're looking at, and a guy that has his alma mater playing, Ken Dilger, going to join us coming up about 17 minutes from now. We will get into all of that because both these guys, Jimmy and Eddie, are going to be busy this weekend. We'll let you know where they're going to be as well when we come back. Query Company here on a Wednesday that feels like a Friday on the Fan.
Sure.
Had he obviously not tragically died at the age of 27, what do you think Jimi Hendrix would look like in his early 80s? Like, when I say look like, I don't mean physically. I mean, like, what would his stature be? Would he be like a cool, hip dude now? Would he be a guy that was like, people, were like, oh, yeah, he was big 70 years ago, but I haven't heard from him in 20 years. Would he still be relevant? What do you think?
From my generation's perspective, born in 95 onward, I would think if he was still among us, he would be viewed as one of the, greatest performing artists of his era and an icon of music. I don't think his stature would have faded. Do you?
I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if someone's early, passing elevates their status and cements them in legendary status more so because they never get the chance to decline, if you will. And, of course, he's part of the, morbid as it may be, the Forever 27 Club, the members of music that died at the age of 27. But Jimi Hendrix today, his 82nd birthday. So if he were alive, he would be blowing out 82 candles today. Legendary, and another guy, Seattle guy, legendary performer, obviously. I was never a huge fan, but clearly one of the great guitarists of all time, and his Star Spangled Banner and his Woodstock, his link to Woodstock is obviously, a massive, massive part.
I have a hard time thinking that you, with someone so influential with 20th century music, that you wouldn't have like still seeing, oh, hey, Jimi Hendrix is playing so and so this weekend.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, McCartney is obviously, look at how revered McCartney is, right? And Dylan as well. I mean, Dylan is obviously somebody that's in that same category. Okay, high school football state finals are upon us. Ken Dilger going to join us just under 10 minutes from now. You guys are both going to be busy this. I still feel like I say this weekend. I forget tomorrow's Thursday, but you get what I'm saying in terms of just the best weekend downtown. Jimmy, we'll start with you. You will be doing which game? So
I have the night game on Friday, Class 6A game, Brownsburg against Westfield, right here on the IHSA Champions Network on the radio side.
Okay, so you're on the radio side for that. Eddie, you also are working, correct?
Yes, they don't want to take everyone away from radio with this face on television, so they put me on radio as well. I have the afternoon game and the evening game on Saturday, so we'll have Heritage Hills and Fort Wayne Bishop Luers at 3 o'clock Saturday, and then Decatur Central and Warsaw. That is the 5A state championship game at 7 o'clock. Of course, that game is dependent on how long the previous goes.
You guys have both been pretty busy just in terms of prepping for this. So what jumps out at you? I guess we'll begin with you, Jimmy, in terms of your 6A matchup. What most jumps out at you about the matchup itself?
Well, I mean, Eddie and I were talking about this the other day as we were both, prepping for our games. Brownsburg's run to this point, you look at the teams they've had to go through and what they've, had to overcome to get here. Avon, Ben Davis, then Lawrence North and Center Grove to get to this stage against Westfield is pretty dynamic. Speaking of dynamic as a whole, both these offenses are just fun, high-powered groups. I think it's going to be a fun, what I hope is a highly competitive game. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, you look at the matchups every year, and to close the night in respective days with the 6A and 5A finals, I mean, it's going to be a great weekend across the board.
Eddie, for you, in terms of Decatur Central, I know obviously you have a professional obligation, but you would like to see them win because it's your alma mater. But the matchup that jumps out at you would be what?
It's fascinating in that matchup in itself because Decatur's a much more balanced offense. They like to throw and they like to run, whereas Warsaw is kind of like Navy and Army. They just want to run you to death, and they hardly pass. I think their quarterback has 15 pass attempts on the season. They have 2 quarterbacks that they'll utilize, but it's a contrast in style, so it should match up pretty fun on Saturday night. And then in the 3A game, Fort Wayne Bishop Luers, they lose their last 3 games of the regular season. They win 5 straight to get to the state championship game. They get a big addition on their offensive line, their right tackle. Right as they start the tournament run, they get another player back as well. And they have been a very, very explosive offense in this tournament run, at least 28 points in every game, 30-plus in 4 or 5. So that game should be fun as well.
The Luers is one of those that just seemingly is always here, right?
Yeah. I think it's their 18th state championship appearance.
Yeah. I mean, it just feels like they are constantly and consistently in the mix. Heritage Hills, we just talked about, one of their proudest alums is Ken Dilger. Jay Cutler from there as well. But Ken Dilger, former Colt, countdown to kickoff from Wish Television, going to join us next. Back in the days when the Colts would actually have tight ends get open. Ken Dilger, who, of course, one of the most popular players in franchise history, and he's going to watch his alma mater this weekend try to win a state football championship. He also is probably set to watch his Illinois Fighting Illini into bowl season here. So things going well for him. He joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Ken, first off, thank you for joining us. It is a pleasure. How are you?
I am good, Jake. Thanks for the time on your show today.
Hey, listen, let's begin with this. I was just mentioning that today is Jimi Hendrix's 82nd birthday, and I didn't know this, but somebody texted me and said if I want to go down a rabbit hole, apparently there's a conspiracy theory that Jimi Hendrix is really Morgan Freeman and he faked his own death. Have you ever heard this?
I have not heard that conspiracy theory.
I mean, immediately I thought, I don't want to be on the radio. I just want to dive into this right now and find this out, right? That's fascinating. This is stuff you learn, Ken, when you come on this show, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, let's begin with this, and I want to talk Heritage Hills with you too, but let's start with the Colts because obviously, you know, you are one of the beloved members of this franchise, and you're still very actively around it, working with Anthony and the folks at Wish Television and Kevin Bowen, who we work with as well, on Countdown to Kickoff. And the tight end position is the one area where the Colts have obviously struggled in getting that established this particular year. It seems to me like they have four guys that all would be on a roster somewhere, but they don't have any lead alpha tight ends. What is your assessment of that room?
Yeah, I totally agree with that statement, Jake. You know, we talk about a lot on Wish TV every Sunday about the tight ends, and you know, we talk about give them opportunities, give them targets, and well, what happened last game when Drew Ogletree dropped that touchdown? So it's just, you know, thinking about it, because I know we're going to talk about this Sunday again, is you look at the tight ends and look what's changed over the last, 5 to 10 years with the NFL as far as practice-wise. You take a look at the summer practices and the fall camp. They go one-a-day practices. They get a day off every other day almost. And so the lack of repetitions for these young tight ends to get better as a wide receiver and as a run blocker as well is very limited. The coaching staff that we have now is not developing these young tight ends just because of the lack of reps and the lack of want-to by Steichen. I know he's trying to get him in there, but it all comes down to, does the quarterback trust the young tight ends? And probably at this point, probably not.
Ken, let me ask you this. When you were playing, you obviously had a quarterback in Peyton Manning that, everybody pretty much knew weren't going to be a lot of design run plays, right? I mean, and so when you are a tight end and you have a quarterback that has the mobility of an Anthony Richardson, and you're running, whether it be RPOs or whether or not just when a play breaks down, Richardson has the ability to escape more so than other quarterbacks. How difficult is that from a mindset of the tight end of kind of knowing how to pivot on a play from going to, I need to be a target, to now, I need to block because this is now a run play?
Yeah, you're right. That's a great question. I've never been a part of an offensive system that had a running tight end. I had Jim Harbaugh for 3 years, Peyton Manning for 4 years. Those weren't your most mobile quarterbacks, but still, as a tight end, if you're going to run block, you got to block your guy for 3 or 4 seconds and let the quarterback or running back kind of go off of what he sees. If you're out there as a receiver and a play breaks down and the quarterback scrambles, there's certain rules as a tight end or a wide receiver that you got to follow. Some guy comes deep, some guy comes back to the quarterback, or some back to the quarterback, and that's what you got to do. So, for the lack of reps with a young quarterback and young tight ends and even some young wide receivers, I think the NFL is missing out on a lot of good stuff by limiting the number of reps these guys get in the summertime and the camp.
Ken, there are still, though, to that end, tight ends that are able to mold and develop in the way where they don't all need to be, Kelce's and Kittles by any stretch of the imaginations, but you get guys like Gesicki that carve out long-term roles as veterans established within the league. When you look at the specific Colts tight end room, I'll be honest with you, I've been out on them for the last year. I think they all would be on NFL rosters. I don't think they're starting caliber tight ends. If you were to look at that room, though, is there reason to not be that harsh? Is there still room for them to grow and develop, or is it clear this offseason they will need to address that position?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that Ballard kind of fell in love with that really big, tall, athletic tight end. I think Mo Alley Cox is, 6'6" or 6'7". Jelani Woods is at least 6'6", and I think he wanted to have that big tight end. Well, a lot of those big tight ends aren't really great route runners, and it takes a lot of time for those guys to develop because in college, those guys were the biggest guys on the field and most athletic, facing either a linebacker or a safety, so they can kind of run down the field and kind of work their way open, and the quarterback will throw in the ball. In the NFL, it's a totally different story. You've got to get into a system. You've got to run routes versus a very athletic linebacker, very athletic safeties that are 6'2" and 6'3" as well. So it takes time to develop that, and I think in the offseason they need to go out there and get a true pass-catching tight end. You know, Mo Alley Cox's contract's up. Colin Granson, his contract's up. So I doubt if they re-sign them. Then you still got, Ogletree. You still got Mallory, which are still young. I think can develop into a solid tight end. Jelani Woods, what do you do with him? He's been on the IR for the last 2 years. So that's a big question mark as well. But, you bring up a Gesicki. He signed in Cincinnati last year for $2.5 million. I think everybody would love to have a Gesicki with the Colts for $2.5 million for a one-year deal.
Do you miss it, Ken?
Oh, for sure. Definitely. I mean, you take a look at what happens on every Sunday and the stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and, it's just – it never leaves you. I'm 53 years old, and I'd put on a helmet right today and go out there if I could. But I think everybody misses that locker room, that on-the-field stuff, that game day nervousness you get when you run out into the field.
Have you asked? Because I think they might actually put you out there if you were interested this Sunday. Have you inquired?
I'll tell you what, I pulled hamstrings enough in the last 5 years chasing, running after people. So I doubt if I could run a route right now. But, as an athlete, it never goes away. And for a position with the Colts that hasn't really been there for the last, 5 years since Jack Doyle retired, it's tough to see.
Which is more difficult, to adapt to? If you are a tight end who is a natural receiver, is it harder for that guy to learn how to instinctively start to block, or is it harder to take a guy that's an instinctive blocker and teach him how to be a receiver?
Well, I think it's two totally different athletes. If you have a pass-catching tight end, they're not going to be a big-boned tight end or a big, strong guy. You take a look at your best wide receiver or your best tight ends now in the NFL, they're kind of a little bit on the slight side, which makes them great pass-catching tight ends. But if you take a tight end, say George Kittle, he's kind of on that slight side. But I tell you what, he gives great effort in run blocking. I think he's kind of that old-school mentality. And nowadays, I think the young kids, as a tight end, all they want to do is pass catch just because that's what gets you the glory. And it's hard to find good blocking tight ends anymore just because they don't want to do it.
So in your playing days, when you look back and think about it, Ken Dilger is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. When you think about your days as a blocker, whether it be for Harbaugh or Manning or, even when you were in Tampa, give me the guy that you recall being the one that you were like, oh, my gosh, that was a nightmare when I looked up and that guy's coming full force and I know I got to block him. Who jumps out the most?
God, I tell you what, the whole old AFC East, you had Buffalo and the Jets and New England and Dolphins. You got old school guys like Bryce Pop with the Bills, who was 6'5", 240, and just a stud outside linebacker. You got, the Jets guys, the Bills guys. It's just those outside linebackers that are just, so athletic and long-armed. Those are the guys that I had to block on a consistent basis. Bruce Smith, the defensive end, Jason Taylor from Miami, those type of guys. The old AFC East was just brutal on tight ends, blocking defensive ends and linebackers. What
is your assessment to this point, Ken, of, the mechanics of Anthony Richardson?
I would say he's slowly getting better. Before he got benched, you take a look at what he has done in the pocket as far as his footwork, his fundamentals. They weren't very good. He got happy feet. And a lot of times when he got pressure up the middle, he'd overthrow the ball, and sometimes he got intercepted. I think that now the last couple of games he's gotten better, but I still think he has a long way to go to get his footwork to where it should be. And now I know he's got a lot on his plate with, the offense and being a second-year guy with limited reps last year. So I think with him it's just the fundamentals, just because when he gets outside the pocket and throws the ball on the run, he throws a lot of good balls, and I think a lot of people feel that same way. So now it's just up to Shane Steichen to kind of figure out what's the best type of offense for Anthony Richardson. Is he going to be a pocket passer? Is he going to be on the run and throw the ball outside the pocket? I think that's what they're trying to figure out these next 4 or 5 games.
Okay, let me give you my concern, and then I want you to tell me how completely absurd my concern is, and maybe that's why I'm on the radio and not a coach, okay? And that is that Richardson has progressed here as they have opened up more the run game for him and allowed him to do what he is most comfortable in, which oftentimes is tuck, design, run the ball, and he's very effective at that. The problem is the more you lean into that comfort zone for him, the more you're taking away the possibility of him truly becoming a pocket passer, and thus when the legs go away, whether it be to injury or attrition, then you are back to square one of an area that didn't fully develop of baptism by fire. How ridiculous a concern is that?
No, I don't think it's a concern at all, or ridiculous concern, because I think he's got maybe another 2-year window for him to be a run-pass option or a running quarterback, just because he is very good when you structure a quarterback sweep with him. He's got blockers that can block the outside, he can block the linebackers, and now it's just him one-on-one with a safety or a cornerback, and he can do a good job of protecting himself and getting extra yards. But I think after 2 more years, he's got to work on his fundamentals to become a pocket passer and get away from that 6 to 8 to 10 runs a game that are scripted for him, just because at some point we saw it with RG3, we saw it with, Andrew Luck. At some point, he's going to take some hits that's going to cost him his career. And I think he's got probably another 2-year window to kind of figure out his fundamentals as a quarterback in the pocket.
So as you're watching the game on Sunday, Ken Dilger, and the Colts are in New England, give me something that you're looking for with Anthony Richardson in terms of his body movement early in the game that will tell you whether or not he is going in the right direction that you're hoping for. Tell me what an educated NFL eye is going to notice about him in that game that shows you he is continuing to progress.
Well, I think you take a look at his feet in the pocket. When he drops back, 5 or 6 yards, what is his feet doing? Is he setting up and throwing the ball on time and in rhythm? Or does he have happy feet and his feet are all over the place? You saw that early on, first couple of games of his career this year. He's made a big change in that the last couple of games. But I want to see that on the road versus a pretty good New England defense. He can set up, throw the ball within 2 to 3 seconds, get the ball out of his hands. If it's incomplete, it's incomplete. Just get rid of it and move on. But I want to see his footwork and see him throw the ball on time, on rhythm to the wide receiver or tight ends.
Ken, whenever we have former champions on, I always like to take a trip down memory lane. You wind up winning a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay in the 2002 season. They beat the Oakland Raiders 48-21. The Raiders come into that game very heavy offensive juggernaut. They're favored by 4, and it's a defensive domination in what was the Gruden Bowl at the time. What do you remember most about that game and the celebration afterwards, winning a Super Bowl?
It was one of those crazy games that Gruden was traded from Oakland to Tampa Bay that year. And you kind of go through the season, you kind of go through the beginning of the playoffs and thinking that, okay, we can get to Super Bowl, and we did versus Oakland. And I remember out in San Diego, we're having that week of practice, and Gruden is out there running the 2-minute drill as Rich Gannon making all the calls, and he taught the Buccaneers defense every 2-minute call that Rich Gannon was going to make, whether it's a slant and go, whether it's a streak or whatever. And you saw the Buccaneers defense have, I think, 4 interceptions that game. And I want to say 2 pick sixes, maybe 3. And, it kind of turned out what John Gruden said it was, that they're not going to switch any calls because Rich Gannon's a creature of habit. And it turned out great. And we went back and celebrated until the wee hours of the morning and had a great time.
I was going to say, man, now I've always wondered this, and I'm not trying to tip off people that, to try to find it here, but how often do you wear the Super Bowl? Is the Super Bowl ring just on the mantle? Do you wear it? I'd wear it every single day, right? I mean, I'd wear it as a necklace. I'd be like Flava Flav with it.
Yeah, I don't wear it very often. When I go out and speak to certain groups, I'll wear it. Certain events, I'll wear it. But it's one of those things that's actually too big to wear, and you start shaking hands and getting around people with that thing on, it just hurts. And now, this was 22 years ago. Now they've become twice the size, and now that you can have a screw-off cap like Tampa Bay had 2 years ago that has the top of the stadium on it. So they've become really enormous. But, yeah, I wear it occasionally.
Ken, how much do you pay attention to? Ken Dilger is our guest. Your high school is going to be competing for a high school state championship this weekend. I have always said on this show, I've said it a gabillion times, I just think this weekend is awesome. Everything about it downtown, the lighting of the tree, all the people that are in town for the high school football finals, the Pacers playing. It's just awesome. And Heritage Hill is going to be one of those. How much do you follow what they're doing?
Oh, I follow everything that they do. You know, Todd Wilkerson, the head coach there, was a teammate of mine. He was a senior when I was a junior. And so I talk to him all the time in the off season, talk to him about, you know, what's going on with, you know, just certain offenses because he has changed that offense from what Bob Clayton ran for 20-some, 30 years, more of a open offense. But, you know, I watch their games on the huddle every weekend when I can, and I'm 100% a Patriots fan on this weekend.
Is your hometown Santa Claus, Indiana? Is that your hometown?
No, my hometown is Mariah Hill. We're just about 3 miles north of Santa Claus.
So when you, like on Monday Night Football, though, were you ever tempted to just say Ken Dilger, Santa Claus?
No, definitely not.
Which would have been, if it was December, it'd have been cool, right? Like it'd have been fun.
Yeah.
But, you know,
on a Christmas Day game, yeah, that probably would have been fun.
You were just a suburb of Santa Claus, just so people know, right? Not actually in downtown Santa Claus.
Yeah, I mean, down there's probably 10 towns that go to my high school. It's a consolidated high school, and Santa Claus is probably the biggest one at probably 1,500 people. So it's out in the middle of the country, but people love Holiday World, and they do a great job down
the
there.
traffic in Santa Claus just gets unbearable. If you get there at the wrong time of day. Ken, before we let you go, I wanted to ask you this as well. And I appreciate this first time we've had you on, really. And obviously, you know, you're a beloved figure here in town. Your energy is noticeable even over the radio airwaves. When I see you once a year, it's usually at the Bailey and Wood golf outing. And that, to me, seems the perfect fit for you because Mike Wood that runs that, even though he's a Miami Dolphins fan, this is a company and a business that it's all about community and putting money back into the schools and the choirs and the groups in the south side of Indianapolis. And it just seems to me to be the perfect fit for you to be able to be somebody that is not only known in the community, but also an integral part of it just in terms of giving back to people. That, to me, seems like kind of your entire MO, right?
Yeah, you're right, Jake. Bailey and Wood has done such an incredible job with the community. You know, they've been around for over 15 years based out of Whiteland on the south side, and they sponsor everything that they can get their hands on, whether it's on the TV shows or the radio shows or a golf outing that they give back to the local veterans of the area. They do a turkey trot. They do every parade. They do everything they can to give back to the local community, and I'm so proud of what Bailey and Wood stands for. They've got a great reputation around the state. I think now we're up to 22 branches across the state. Mike Wood has done a great job of giving us the freedom to go out there and do any event that we would like to do with his sponsorship. So it's been a great partnership with Mike. You know, Jeff Saturday was our spokesman for a couple of years. Mike and I do a NFL pick'em on the week of the show here. So it's been a great love relationship with that group.
Are you going to be at the game for Heritage Hills this weekend, I assume? I mean, do they even have you maybe come in and talk to the kids before the game?
I won't talk to the kids, but I'll be on the sideline with Bob Clayton. Bob's coming up, the old coach there for the last 30 years, Indiana Hall of Famer, and we'll be talking about all the good times we had together 30 years ago, and I'll be cheering those guys on from the sideline.
All right, Ken, we appreciate it. I will let you – now, here's the thing, because now you have an assignment. Not only do you have to watch, you know, with Anthony and break down and Kevin and the guys and break down countdown to kickoff and then watch the high school game, but then you've got to go home and within the next week let me know whether or not Morgan Freeman is actually Jimi Hendrix. That's your assignment.
I will look that up and I'll ask around all the other conspiracy theorists and see what they say about that.
That's right. That'll keep you busy. Ken, happy Thanksgiving to you, man. Happy to have you on.
Thanks, guys. Anytime.
I appreciate it. Ken Dilger joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Good stuff there. And listen, I can only imagine he is one guy that, like, just if you were to make a mold of a tight end, he is the mold of a tight end, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just a bigger dude and active, but I think a really, you know, if you look at the career of Peyton Manning, it was so important for Manning, I think, to have that kind of safety net player. And there is an element of, for Anthony Richardson, we talked about it when we had Jeff George on, just of who that safety net player can be. And I think Jeff actually said he thought it could be Josh Downs, and that's kind of who it's become, right, for Anthony Richardson. You just need that one guy, or maybe Taylor out of the backfield, but Taylor is not a receiving back per se. Marshall Faulk was for Manning in that first year, and then later he had edge. But I just think, Jimmy, it is so important to have that one guy that when a quarterback knows if the feet are starting to get happy, where's my guy that's going to bail me out? Dilger was that for Peyton Manning in the early years.
No doubt. And Downs, you're right, could very well be that for Anthony Richardson here in the modern edition of the Colts. I would argue Michael Pittman Jr. is also, that big body type of receiver that fills the void of a tight end to some extent, where he's able to always be near the sticks, always be near an opening for a completion. But it's an area of weakness. And I know I preach on this show being an offense-first guy, but in general, when you're trying to develop a quarterback as the Colts are looking ahead to 2025, make life easier on Anthony Richardson. And that includes, doesn't have to be an all-pro tight end, but even a middle-of-the-pack tight end at this point in time for the Colts would help in Shane Steichen's offensive mold and also for the overall development of Anthony Richardson.
Some people think that Morgan Freeman also is Nelson Mandela. But have you heard the Morgan Freeman, Jimi Hendrix theory?
I've not. I did do a quick Google search when you brought that up.
Rob in Wyoming sent that to me and said, my buddy in Laramie, Wyoming, said, look, if you get bored, go down this rabbit hole. And I'm like, wait a minute. Now, here's the thing.
Is that your future neighbor?
He is, as a matter of fact. Rob's scouting out land for me right now out in Wyoming. And then when I need the mortgage for it, I call Ken Dilger, right? It works out perfectly.
There you go.
Now, here's the thing, though. Morgan Freeman, he was on the electric company in the early 70s. So I guess the question would be, was Morgan Freeman a famous person during the lifetime of Jimi Hendrix? Because if nobody had heard of Morgan Freeman until all of a sudden he just popped up out of nowhere in 1971, you're like, well, we might be onto something. But if there's video evidence of Morgan Freeman as an actor or doing stuff in 1970, what year did can you look for me what year Morgan Freeman started on the electric company? I'm going to guess 74, 75.
Rose to fame in the 70s is the label there.
What's that?
He rose to fame with the electric company in the 70s.
What year was Morgan Freeman born?
37.
37. So that would put him at 87 years old. Is that right?
You are correct.
So he's 5 years older than Jimi Hendrix.
Yes.
So Jimi Hendrix just decided.
Has his birthday passed?
Morgan Freeman's birthday?
Yes. Are we sure?
June 1st.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
you're good. You're clear.
right?
You're clear. Yes. Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yes.
Does he look like Jimi Hendrix? I don't think he really looks like him, right?
I don't think so. No.
I mean,
Plastic surgery, obviously.
Who came up with this? Like, was there some guy just sitting around one night listening and tripping on acid to Jimi Hendrix and was like, you know what? I'm just going to throw out that this guy.
That's how most of those stories go, right?
Are you suggesting it's stronger than the watermelon gummies, Jake?
That's right. I mean,
well, Eddie, let's speak to you on that front, I guess. Have you ever had conspiracy theorists emerge when you're enjoying the Sour Patch?
No.
Okay.
see, here's the thing that's difficult about this with the Morgan Freeman discussion. Maybe this is what we need to do. Here is my by end of year goal. Are you ready?
Okay.
By the end of the year, we need to have the Shawshank Redemption viewing party. You guys are not allowed to watch it since you've not seen it yet, neither one of you. I want to be there when you both watch it for the first time. If you're willing to Eddie, yesterday, we were talking on the phone, and Eddie, you heard the dog activity, right?
I did.
There's a lot of dog activity going on in the background at Shannon's house, but she's got the home theater and that whole deal. So
yes, we're talking about animals here.
That is correct, yes. So that would be ideally for you guys to come over there, but you're going to have to deal with the possibility of a French bulldog climbing on you and a golden retriever that goes out and does meth and comes back inside. There's a lot going on there.
I mean, I'll go with the golden retriever, so it's fine with me.
Did you give him some gummies and calm him down?
We'll be best friends.
All right, fair enough. By the way, Casey Vallier, who is in charge of coordinating all the radios out at the Colts complex and also hopefully the phones, because he's going to join us in 35. like to welcome those of you who have flipped over from the Indiana game to check in on the program because, admittedly, the strategy would be to not necessarily mention another game that's going on when we're on the air, even though it's on our sister station, WIBC. But Indiana getting absolutely run out of the gym by Louisville.
Can you give us one of those?
Ugh.
There you go.
They're in Atlantis taking on water, and they're down, I believe it might be 28 now.
I think they got lost there.
Louisville is running precise sets and running them out of the gym. Indiana looks completely clueless. They have no direction. They have no offense. They have no idea what they're doing on defense. They have yet to make a switch.
They just look lost.
They look completely lost.
Well, at least they can still do the slide at Atlantis. They can still have some fun.
Atlantis is in the Bahamas, right?
Correct.
Okay, Indiana's in the Bermuda Triangle. They have no idea where the hell they are. And they look completely – it's still early in the season, admittedly, and there's still 12 minutes left in this game. Maybe Indiana – maybe they come back. Who knows? Certainly doesn't look that way. Joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Big weekend for him. He's going to be busy. It's Thanksgiving weekend, but Kyle Neddenriep has been nice enough to join us over the course of the season talking high school football. The state finals are upon us. Kyle, we begin with 6A. It's a big one. I think it's two teams that you thought a couple of weeks ago when we talked to you could be here. But you are most looking forward to what aspect of we'll begin with that 6A title game?
Yeah, I was going to say your segue there was, speaking of lost and clueless, we bring on Kyle Neddenriep from the Indy Star. But, you missed it. You missed You missed your chance.
I wanted to give you more credit than that, Kyle. Come on.
But yeah, I can't wait for this game.
Can you imagine if I said that? Would you ever come on here again if I'm like, and by the way, speaking of a guy that has no idea what in the hell's going on, he looks like he's playing for Indiana, but Kyle Neddenriep joins us now.
I was kind of hoping. I was like, man, what a great setup you would have had there.
That's right.
But yeah, Westfield and Brownsburg, I think, should be. I covered this game the first time they played. It was the weird Saturday game after the hurricane day, and it was it felt like kind of like a college game. You're playing 2:00 on a Saturday, and certainly two teams that have lived up to it. In that game, I felt like Westfield, maybe left some points on the board in the first half, and credit Brownsburg's defense for holding them out, but they missed on a couple of chances and kind of left the door open. Then Brownsburg got a kickoff return for Brandon Sharp and kind of flipped the game around. And then, Westfield had their quarterback went out of that game, Carson Melvin, in the fourth quarter. He couldn't play. They were playing from behind 17-13, couldn't put a drive together, and Brownsburg ended up winning. I don't know how much relevance that game has necessarily on this game. Certainly, I think shows us it's going to be close, and I think I can't imagine this game won't be close. I mean, that's kind of the one guarantee, I think, unless there's a rash of turnovers or something like that. But, I think my, opinion is it'll be largely – I think it's a lot of strength versus strength. Brownsburg's defense has been really good. Westfield's offense, especially the run game, has been really strong here of late. So, I think that'll be a fun part of this. And then how they defend Brownsburg. The passing game for Brownsburg's been good. The running game last week against Center Grove was really good. So, that Westfield defense, which has been strong all year, will also be tested. So it's a great matchup. It's two teams that I think will be very excited to be there. Westfield's been there a couple times in recent years under Jake Gilbert, and now has a chance to play somebody other than Center Grove like they played in 2020 and 2021. And it's a Hoosier Crossroads Conference rival. So, Brownsburg will bring a lot of people. First time in 39 years they've been there. So, that game will be very well attended. I think all these games, Jake, will have a chance to be really. I think it'd be great crowds on both days. I mean, that's kind of the good. As I look at these matchups and teams that'll be involved, I think that's a pretty cool thing about this weekend.
What do you see on that 4A matchup, Kyle? East Noble versus New Pal. I know we talked about it last week, but it feels like whenever Kyle, Ralph, and the Dragons are in these situations, they take care of business. What do you see in the 4A slot?
Yeah, I think it'll be tough to beat New Pal. One of the cool things about this, which I didn't know until we got to the state finals meeting, was Alex Stewart and Kyle Ralph are pretty good, pretty friendly. Alex had reached out to Kyle about when he, even before he was a head coach, just about building his weight program up, and they've kind of kept in touch over the years, and even through this year, not knowing they would end up playing each other in the state finals, but just, keep in touch on how the season's going and things like that. So there is a connection there. You might not think about that with these schools being, as far apart as they are, but I think largely, they're kind of the same type of teams in a lot of ways. I think New Pal certainly has an advantage here, and man, they're set up even for next year. You look ahead, I know they're going to lose Michael Thacker, their star defensive tackle, but a lot of those guys on the team are juniors. The quarterback, running back. There's just a lot of players who will be back next year. So, I think when we look back at this, you almost wonder if the New Pal Chittard game kind of decided things. But I'll give East Noble. I think they've got a chance. They're going to have to control the ball as much as possible, which they do pretty well with their ground game. And Dylan Krell, their running back, who also is a star linebacker for the Knights. So they're going to need to try to keep the ball out of New Pal's hands as much and kind of keep it from, sometimes with New Pal, it's kind of like a snowball. You're in the game and then all of a sudden it's rolling downhill and then there's just no way of fighting back. So, they're going to have to keep that from happening and hopefully, take this game into the second half where it's a one-score game and keep them close. But I think New Pal just got a lot of confidence. They're playing really well. And Kyle Ralph has been there, and done it so many times. I can't imagine they won't be a really confident team on Friday.
Kyle, what's of all the teams that are left to play for a state title here in Indiana and high school football in the 2024 season, whether it be an individual kid or a school and team itself, what's the best storyline of the weekend?
I would say, there's a story I'm going to have out tomorrow on what coaches are thankful for Thanksgiving, and some of that will be in there. That's maybe unrelated to the game, but I think there's a couple of good stories in there. I won't give that away just yet, but I think from a team perspective, I'm curious what the Warsaw story is. I think is a cool one to me. And I think they're going to fill the place, and maybe not fill the place up, but fill up their section, I would say, on Saturday night, because they've never been here before. And I know from, seeing what their basketball team, as far as that the fandom goes for basketball, they're very excited to be there, and they're going to be playing a really good Decatur Central team, obviously. But I think they're a cool story just because they haven't done it before. And also the 2A game, Adams Central, they keep knocking on the door. And I was kind of joking with Coach Lambert at North Judson. They finally got through Adams Central to make it in 1A, and then they're sitting there at the state finals media day on Monday, and have to sit next to Adams Central. It's like you finally get through them, and then you see them again, but in a different class. But I think they're a good story too, because they've made it the last 3 years. Haven't been able to get through. They go up a class and get back here again, and I think that's a pretty cool story. Whether they can get through Linton Stockton, who knows? But the fact that they're there again, I think, is a really cool story, and kind of a credit to what they've done as a program. They just they're kind of like you don't want to say they're the Buffalo Bills, but they're kind of in that position. Their fourth time being here and a chance to finally get over the hump. And they've played Lutheran really tough 2 of the last 3 years, and those are obviously, as we know, really good Lutheran teams. So I think that's a neat story as well.
What about our Fighting Eddie Garrisons in Decatur Central in that 5A matchup?
Yeah, I like their chances. I do. I think it's a contrast of styles, I would say, to maybe the largest degree of any of these games. Between Decatur Central speed and they're physical too. I mean, I wouldn't say they're not physical. They definitely are. They're fast on the defensive side as well. But you get matched up with a definitely a running team. Bart Curtis and Warsaw, they're going to run the ball, and they do it with their quarterback too. But they run it with multiple people, and that's pretty much what you're going to get. They don't throw the ball hardly at all. They're about 40 passing yards per game, which is that's obviously very low. But they run it for almost 300, and that's against another part of that Warsaw story. They beat the number 1, 2, and 3 teams in the state. So now they're playing number 4 Decatur, which you could make an argument Decatur should be number 1, but they obviously had a couple losses this year. But yeah, I think that's maybe that'll be the last game of the season, and maybe one of the most intriguing just from a style standpoint. And I don't know how. I haven't seen Warsaw in person. I've seen Decatur in person, and I know they're really tough to match up with, just because they have so much versatility with their offense and just playmakers on defense too. Some of the same guys on defense, and we saw what Carter did last week. With the kickoff return and the interception return against Bloomington South. So, they've got the guys who do it on both sides of the ball. But yeah, that's a very intriguing matchup there, I'd say, in 5A.
Kyle Neddenriep will have all of the coverage with the Indianapolis Star. Games getting underway Friday and Saturday. Lucas Oil Stadium and state champions crowned in the state of Indiana. And then we shift to basketball season and we bother him more. Kyle, your competence is not in question. You have that separating you from Indiana basketball today, but we certainly appreciate the time. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving and enjoy the weekend, all right?
All right, same to you guys. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. Kyle Neddenriep joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. About 18 minutes from now, we're going to turn things to talking about the Colts. But when we come back, not only are we going to find out and solve the riddle altogether from an audio standpoint, whether Jimi Hendrix and Morgan Freeman are the same guy, but I'm just simply going to say this. This is the most incompetent, ill-prepared, and unorganized, because we have it on in here. We're obviously not listening to the game, but we can see what's going on. Indiana looks terrible. They look like they have no idea what they're doing offensively. They look like they have no idea what Louisville had planned for. They have no idea how to make switches on defense. They have no clue how to handle their transition. They don't know how to get open shots. When they get open shots, they miss them. When they get layups, they doink them. When they have open passes, they sail them into the third row. This is the most inexcusably incompetent performance from an alleged top 20 team that I've seen in a very long time. Anything you want to add to that, Jimmy?
Who knew that when you drive the lane, you get open shooters? Louisville knows that. Not a lot of competence offensively for the Hoosiers. Very sad.
All the way around. They literally look like it looks like 12 guys from the hyper that have never met one another. There are 5 guys from a dorm floor at McNutt that have better cohesiveness and understanding of how to play and move on the basketball floor than Indiana today. Inexcusable. Indiana would probably like to see the return of Chris Mack at Louisville. Maybe then they'd get within 35 of them. Okay, so Morgan Freeman and Jimi Hendrix, are they the same guy? Now.
By the way, we if we're doing this, we need the tinfoil hat out. Like, I feel like...
I don't think so.
Oh, I do. That's a good call there. Because this is the ultimate conspiracy theory, right?
There's no conspiracy about this.
I don't know.
Somebody's on acid
Okay.
trying to make this a thing.
Now, Morgan Freeman, do you happen to have, I think everybody knows what Morgan Freeman sounds like, Eddie, but do you happen to have an audio clip of Morgan? Somebody pointed this out to me. It's the best way to do it. Pull up an interview from Jimi Hendrix and then pull up the voice of Morgan Freeman, right? Especially if we have Morgan Freeman as a younger man, but either way, it doesn't matter. Your voice does change a little bit as you get older, but do you happen to have any audio of Morgan Freeman speaking, Eddie?
I'll look for one.
Okay.
I don't have any available at the moment.
Okay. I happen to have an audio clip of Jimi Hendrix speaking. Okay. So you tell me whether or not this sounds in any way, shape, or form like, do you have in your mind what Morgan Freeman sounds like, Jimmy?
I do, yes.
Okay. This is Jimi Hendrix.
You know, and like musicians, especially young cats, you know, they get a chance to make all this money and they say, wow, this is fantastic. And like I said before, they lose themselves and they forget about the music itself, you know. They forget about their talents. They forget about the other half of them.
Yeah, I don't hear it at all.
In 1967, Andy Dufresne from Shawshank Prison. Now, I'm not giving any spoilers for you guys because you haven't seen the movie.
Sure.
Yeah,
No, I don't think it's there. I don't hear it. There's
Don't
no
hear it
vocal
either.
distinction.
Morgan much more deeper.
There's a certain thing about the cadence of Freeman as well. That's just it's not
Well,
there.
he might have learned that as an older man. Maybe in like 1972 when he decided to reinvent himself, he's like, I have to get rid of my subtle British type accent in talking about music. And I need to begin talking like this. Maybe that's what he did.
It could be.
So did we already debunk our
Yeah, I think we did.
conspiracy theory?
I think we did. It's a good thing we're not a conspiracy show. We would have knocked that out in the first 2 hours of programming.
Can you imagine if we had a Netflix show on conspiracies and
Man.
we're like, well, we now have 28 and a half minutes to fill. We put that one to bed quickly, right?
Kind of like Louisville without you.
Listen.
This is a tough watch.
And again, I want to thank people that have jumped back over to us after listening to this train wreck that is Indiana basketball. I mean, they have talent. There's no doubt. They look like, and I'm not kidding you when I say this, they look like a group. Sometimes this just happens in games. It doesn't mean it's going to happen all year, but they look like a group that has never played together. Literally, they look like a group that has not practiced a single offensive set.
There's no flow. There's no consistency. Eddie and I talked about it last week. The effort level has felt lackluster, and they look like a team that was not prepared to get run or be on the wrong end of extended runs.
When I
against
was a
team like
student at
Louisville.
IU, I remember saying,
When was that, Jake?
talking back in my
Many
days,
moons ago.
many moons ago. But I remember talking to a player, and I said, talking about the motion offense, and I'm like, man, how much do you guys work on that? And they're like, dude, it was grueling in October because that's all we worked on. But then the rest of the year, we would work on whatever offensive set the team that we were playing ran. So, like, if they were playing Iowa, Knight would teach them the Iowa offense for, like, the 3 games leading up to the Iowa game. And I remember Pat Graham one time telling me, he goes, I remember we were playing somebody, and I told the guy I'm guarding, I'm like, hey, dude, you're supposed to cut over here. He goes, we knew their offense better than they did. This looks like Louisville absolutely knows whatever type of hyper offense it is that Indiana's trying to run. Louisville knows exactly what it is, and they're intercepting every lane. And Indiana looks like they have no idea what Louisville's running.
Well, maybe it
Because
snuck up on them. This game's only been on the schedule for
Indiana's getting beat on backdoor cuts. They're getting beat on switches. They're getting beat on every single aspect of the game of basketball that you should do, even at the most elementary of level. Terrible. Absolutely terrible. Casey Vallier, who is the coordinator for radio, is that right?
Yes.
And phone lines, hopefully, right?
That would be a promotion. You'd have to ask him.
For the Colts, joins us next. Casey Vallier is the in-game studio host and radio coordinator. He's been over there today just doing nothing but setting up the transistors, boom boxes, all the radios. He's coordinating all of them for the Indianapolis Colts. Joins us to talk about the Colts and the Patriots coming up on Sunday. But, of course, we will not be with you tomorrow, Thanksgiving Day, or Friday. So this is the final show of the week. Casey, I will begin with this, a simple Happy Thanksgiving to you. Let me begin with that. Do you guys how does it work from an NFL standpoint in terms of the scheduling when you're not playing on Thanksgiving but you play on Sunday?
Yeah, so it's for the players and the staff, and I'm sure there's a handful of people that work, that aren't part of the football personnel that have pretty busy weeks. For us, it's kind of all hands on deck the first 3 days. So like the day kind of wraps up a lot of what of our stuff is. We'll have coverage on Friday, minimal tomorrow, and then everything goes right back to status quo starting Saturday and Sunday. So we all kind of get a couple days, a day and a half, or if you will, to kind of decompress and get some family time. But it's still, it's one of the things I'd like to tell my family working in this industry. Holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving, they're important holidays and all that, but there's still a lot of stuff that needs to get done by Sunday.
Casey, from a continuity standpoint, has there been a shift now that it appears the direction of the franchise is back in Anthony Richardson's hand?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think once you you answer some of those questions, because ultimately when, the move to Flacco happened, you knew that there was going to be another change, whether that was at the end of the season or in the middle of the season. You knew that Joe Flacco wasn't your long-term answer. So ultimately, when you're able to have that biggest question mark answered, there is that continuity and there is that little bit of, okay, you kind of know what to anticipate, what to expect as a given week goes on. So I think the move to Anthony Richardson, no longer have we had the, in Shane Steichen's press conferences, it seemed like week in and week out for about a 4-week period, it was, who's your starting quarterback? Are they going to play this week? Why are you confident? No longer do we have those questions. So just from that mental standpoint, I think continuity-wise, you definitely have a lot more clarity.
Casey, the overall, I guess, atmosphere with kind of knowing now with those questions being gone of who the quarterback is, do you feel like there was, in fact, distraction that was taking place during, and I get it, and maybe 20 years from now we'll read a book where we find out exactly what the timeline was thought it was going to be when they went to Flacco and et cetera. But the reality is there any chance that just disrupted chemistry within the locker room?
No, there's definitely a lot of validity to that question for sure, because ultimately when you look at the production on the field in those 2 games with Flacco, it was not at all what you had wanted or hoped or expected to see. So that leans that question to maybe there was some, a little uneasiness in the locker room. I understand that completely. I think ultimately there had to be a little bit of of self-reflection. You kind of look in the mirror at, okay, well, this is what I thought the plan was, and now I have to, adjust to this new plan. And a lot of times that impacts a lot of those guys. I mean, I'm not saying that the football is different, but, it does look a little different coming from Joe Flacco compared to Richardson. And just the way that the cadence is and all of the calls, the way they're made, the way they're said, you got to know where you're going to be, got to be here. And then you throw a wrinkle in there, especially offensively, at who the guy is under center and throwing the passes. It definitely changes a lot of that. So I understand that completely. And you're probably right. I'm sure at some point there's going to be a whole bunch we're going to learn about this whole situation that happened. But ultimately, it seems like it was handled in a very mature way, I think, throughout the locker room. I know you had, some rumblings, but I don't know necessarily if it was geared toward an individual or more just as a whole on, Kenny Moore's, comments a couple weeks ago. I think it was geared more towards the play of the team and not individually what needed to change. So I do think from a mature standpoint, everybody handled this pretty well, especially what you've seen from Anthony Richardson. He's really handled it in stride.
Casey Vallier is our guest. Joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, covers the Colts for the Colts Radio Network. Casey, this goes without saying, but when you have stake in the game or when skin in the game and there's something still to play for, it generally leads to stronger performances, more connectedness, and a common goal that's still there. This could die off if they stub their toe again, but coming out of that gauntlet with playoff hopes, still being alive, albeit slim, what does that do for everybody involved with the Colts moving forward?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the best way to look at this, because I honestly, when I had looked at the schedule, Jimmy, I thought that it was that 4 of 5 on the road with 3 of your 4 AFC South games on the road being done in that early, like that late October. I think it was the entire month of October. It seemed like you weren't home at all. But then you kind of looked a little forward, and it was the 4 of 5 they just got out kind of was the gauntlet of the season. And you kind of thought if you got to Thanksgiving right around that 500 level, I know you're 2 games under, but seems like the entire AFC outside of your division leaders is right where you are. So you definitely have that added jolt of the remaining of the remaining schedule ahead of the Colts is a bunch of bottom feeders. You could say it how you will. Ultimately, that's what it is. You got 3 of these teams with 3 or fewer wins, or 4 of these teams actually with 3 or few wins the rest of the way, and you have an outside chance. Whether it's an outside or a very easy chance, there is a chance and a glimmer of hope that you can be a playoff team. So you're going to go in and you're going to have a little bit more added, togetherness, if you will. I think that's the word you kind of use, where everybody's coming. You're playing for one goal and everything's there on the table. I think you've definitely noticed that, especially what we saw today in the locker room. They seem pretty dialed in.
Casey, tomorrow being Thanksgiving, let's just pretend, and we'll do the old hypothetical, that the entire team is getting set for Thanksgiving dinner, okay?
Okay.
This is a players-only gathering. Typically, Thanksgiving, it is like kind of the alpha member of the family that is hosting, and then somebody that's kind of a leader in the family says, I'm the one preparing the turkey, and then another leader is the one that says, I'm the one that's going to say grace before the meal, etc. Those 3 people for this roster would be who?
So I think Grover Stewart, I think he's going to be the one preparing just because we know of his chef-like qualities. But I think Zaire Franklin is going to be the one saying the prayer and all of that. And I do think that it's probably sticking with the defense. It's probably a toss-up between Kenny Moore and DeForest Buckner, who are hosting. But I do think that Anthony Richardson's probably in that table. I'm sure that's part of where you're wanting to go with this. I think this team does gather around him. So I think if you're looking for an offensive leader, I would say that him or Michael Pittman would be hosting. But I think preparing the meal, whether house it's going to be Grover with Zaire saying the prayer.
And A.D. Mitchell is still trying to get his way off of the kids' table, right? Because he's the rookie that's still figuring it out, right?
Right. I mean, A.D. Mitch, I'm anticipating a little larger role this weekend with the Josh Downs question being up in the air. You also had Ashton Doolin leave a little bit last week. So with it being Thanksgiving, and he might have a bigger role, he may have a seat at the adults table.
Casey, it does feel to me, to be honest with you, I mean, A.D. Mitchell, because of where he was selected and because of the expectation about him, especially through camp, they were very high on him. I know there was expectation. But if there's one position that typically takes the longest to really groom itself in the NFL, it does feel like it's receiver. In other words, there are guys that were really good wide receivers in the National Football League that were not necessarily right out of the womb really good wide receivers, and it did take longer for that position to develop. I keep going back to that on A.D. Mitchell to give him a little bit of a pass. Am I being too generous?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, I think you look directly at their position coach, Reggie Wayne. I mean, he even talks about how it took him really until year 3 to even have a role in the offense. He was kind of that, 4th receiver, if you will, early in his career, and it really took him a couple years to kind of get into that rhythm. And I think part of the issue that has kind of skewed the NFL is when you have guys like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson who – immediately they make a massive jump as rookies in the NFL. You just anticipate that everybody's going to make that same jump. I'm not going to say this isn't really apples to apples, if you will, but New England has a very similar thing going on with their wide receiver and Jalen Polk. He was actually taken, I think it was 14 picks ahead of A.D. Mitchell in this previous draft, and he's got, I think it's like 7 catches for 40 some odd yards. He's very minimally used. And I look at their receiving group, and the top 4 receivers for the Patriots on the year, you have Demario Douglas, who's a receiver, then 2 tight ends and a running back. If you look at that here with A.D. Mitchell, when you look at the top receivers, at least the guys ahead of him are guys in his same group that are receivers. So I think part of it is, too, you got to be able to have enough mouths to feed. And I think A.D. Mitchell is, it's kind of one of those things where you got to learn as you go, and he is just kind of being gradually placed into this Colts offense. But you're right. I mean, it is one of those things where that is a position where there's a lot of differences that you see from the college game to the NFL game that takes a little while for those guys to kind of really get to that spot where they're really comfortable.
Casey Vallier is our guest of the Colts Radio Network on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. He's also brought to us by Shelby Materials, the concrete and aggregate experts. Casey, Jonathan Taylor has been held under 4 yards per carry in 3 of his last 4 games. Additionally, in that same stretch, he's been held under 100 total yards over 3 of the last 4. We know the offensive line has had its issues. We know there's been multiple rookies out there as recently as last week. The penalties plagued them as well, but it's also been a rare stretch of games where you're not getting the same explosive, consistent Jonathan Taylor that we've grown accustomed to. What do you attribute to those struggles 3 of the last 4 where he's been unable to find a rhythm, though the offense itself also has struggled to find rhythm at stretches?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think last week was hard because you can look at all the penalties and you could say that's a bunch of the issues, and I can understand that argument and completely get behind it. But I even felt the game before it was a similar tough road for Taylor. You look at the numbers and you kind of eliminate the long run he had against Buffalo in the last 4 games has been a real struggle for Jonathan to get anything going. And ultimately, that was not going to be the issue when you had Anthony Richardson back. That was kind of the talk was, okay, well, now that Richardson's back in the starting lineup, you can get that running game back going, and it just hasn't taken off. I mean, you saw Anthony Richardson have 61 yards on the ground last week, which is a career high, and ultimately that kind of skews the rushing numbers and puts him up. But, yeah, you talk about the lack of, being able to be productive at all from Jonathan Taylor has been a real struggle. But I think part of it, too, if you look at the numbers, last week he had just 1 carry in the second half. So it may be one of those things. I don't know necessarily if it's, they're intentionally eliminating the running game. But ultimately, he's one of those players that you got to keep feeding him the rock because you've seen what he can do. He can break one off in an instant. And so maybe it's one of those things where the offense has to be more cognizant of we've got to make sure we get him his touches. Even if it's not working early, maybe he can break one because you know how it works with Jonathan Taylor and any of the, dynamic running backs in the league. Once you have one good one, it seems to just kind of get you back in rhythm and they kind of just continue to follow after that. So ultimately, Taylor needs to see a couple go, but, you talk about the offensive line issues you've had. The penalties were a massive issue last week. All of that plays into the running game, and you got to have it all working in sync in order to have a good rushing attack. So I'm sure that's an area that they are really trying to target this week because Jonathan Taylor is so important to this offense, and when he's not going, the rest of the offense doesn't move well either.
Casey Vallier is our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. He is the in-game host for the Colts Radio Network and the coordinator of radio for the Colts. Casey, the tight end room, I've talked about this a lot. To me, I think they have 4 competent tight ends. They just don't have one that has really taken a step forward of saying, I am going to be the guy at this position. In your opinion, who is the Colts' lead tight end?
I would say it's Kylen Granson, just because he gives you more of that, receiving type of tight end. I think your most consistent has been Mo Alley-Cox because of what he does as a blocker, and you could dive into the numbers, and he has been, routinely he gets more snaps because of what he does as a blocker. But the way the game has changed when you see guys like, Travis Kelce and George Kittle and what, Brock Bowers is doing as a rookie, those are what you anticipate what your tight ends looking like, and that just hasn't been here in Indianapolis with this group. And, I don't know what the reason is because one of the things we talked about during training camp was you got 4 guys that you think on any given week can probably give you a little bit of a jolt, and you just haven't seen it. And last week, I think there was a play that, in my eyes, kind of summed up what this tight end room has kind of struggled with. You had the nice over the high, he's able to high point the ball, and Kyle Granson with a big catch, and then he looks up and there's a penalty flag, and it's because Mo Alley Cox was beaten and Drew Ogletree got a hold. So all 3 of the tight ends played a big part on that one play, and that's just been kind of how it has been. You've had miscommunication. You've had drop passes. We saw the Drew Ogletree drop at the end zone. Kyle Granson had another drop over the middle. It's just been everything has kind of come to a head for this tight end room. And I don't know what the answer is, because I think that all of them offer a skill set that you need and you'd like to utilize within an offense. It just hasn't been able to be productive at all in 2024. And I'm anxious to see whether or not they try to make a change, because Will Mallory has been the odd guy out seemingly every week. And maybe, it's something they look and say, maybe we can get an extra little boost from Will Mallory, see if he can be active for a game, because you're going into New England this week. And as I mentioned earlier, 2 of their leading players on their entire offense are both tight ends. So you can see how beneficial having receiving tight ends is. And this team has really been struggling in that department for sure.
Anthony Richardson, in terms of the play calls from Shane Steichen, Casey, do you anticipate, or have you been able to perceive, just in talking to them and being around it this week, that we're going to continue to see not the number of designed play runs that we've seen to this point, but maybe even a progression of that, of utilizing him really as almost like a third running back option for Indianapolis?
Oh, 100%. I think, ultimately Shane has always used the mantra of, when you need to get one, you got to utilize what he does best. And that's, a lot of times he's talking about that more in the end zone. When you got to get in the end zone, you got to do what you got to do. And I think what you're seeing is, with the struggle that the rushing game has been the last handful of weeks, that's kind of the only option that they've been able to excel in. I mean, we saw him being able to get outside the pocket and scramble a couple times last week for, 8 to 12 yards a couple times on routine. And I think ultimately that's what you're going to have to do, because, the teams are – it's hard to say, because Jonathan Taylor typically is a guy that it doesn't matter where you give him the football. If it's up the gut or if you get him on the edge, he can break one. Well, it seems like these runs right up the middle haven't been able to produce anything, and the only real ability to get somebody on the edge has been in Richardson's hands. So I'm assuming that is what you're going to see kind of from here on out, because as we mentioned, these 5 games – ultimately, they're all winnable games. You can go out and win all 5, and you could be a playoff team. So that would kind of qualify in my eyes that you got to have it. So every possession, every snap is key. So you may see a lot more of Anthony Richardson. Maybe it's after your first or second progression, you look to go. And we'll see what happens on Sunday.
Casey Vallier is our guest at the Colts Radio Network on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Casey, you mentioned all these games being winnable. Jake and I discussed this earlier. I look at New England. I don't see a lot of areas where the Colts should struggle in this game, but we know the NFL is a weird beast. As you look at the Patriots and you look at the weaknesses of Indianapolis, are there any areas where it jumps out at you the Colts might have their hands full?
That's a great one, because I have really looked at the numbers this week, and I'm kind of on the same page with you. The only one that gives me pause is, and you can look at their offensive numbers, and they don't look great. And you can look at the turnovers that Drake May has had, and they're not good. He started 6 games. He's got 11 turnovers, so almost 2 turnovers per game. But ultimately, if you've watched any of Drake May, I've seen a handful of, tape watching what he's done. He's really looked pretty good in an offense that's just struggled. Their offensive line isn't great. They don't have a bunch of dynamic weapons. I mean, I'm a big Hunter Henry fan. I have been for a while, so I think he's a really talented tight end that causes a lot of problems. But I do think that Drake May has shown a lot of ability. He's top 10 in scramble yards this year. So Drake May is kind of the one area that I look at that you got to make sure that you keep him in the pocket. You got to set a good edge and force him into those turnover-worthy plays, because that's where he has struggled. But he has shown that if you give him time, you allow him to complete a high percentage of passes, he can move the football down the field. And I think there were times earlier in the year where you saw him go toe-to-toe with Caleb Williams, and he came out on top. So there is some of that where this guy was a top 5 pick. He was highly regarded. He's got a lot of talent. You just got to make sure that he stays a rookie here this Sunday, because that's really the only issue that I look at where there is an ounce where this Colts team could fall, is if you let Drake May really use all of his weapons that he's got at his disposal.
Colts in New England coming up on Sunday. Casey Vallier, of course, the in-game host for that radio broadcast, and we will follow what happens in Foxborough and then assuredly be talking to Casey again this season. Casey, happy Thanksgiving to you, and certainly best in terms of travel this weekend and making sure everybody's happy, healthy, and safe, and we will talk to you soon, all right?
Same to you guys. Happy Thanksgiving, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Casey Vallier from the Colts on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. We're going to talk Indiana from the football side of things and the bucket and the college football playoff coming up in just a couple of minutes. Jimmy, I just keep going back to, in my mind, not to deviate from the Colts conversation, but now that the game is over with, that was as poor a performance from Indiana on the basketball floor as you could. I don't know that you could even think of and imagine a worse, more ill-prepared, sloppy, incompetent performance. Debbie Antonelli, who is a friend of this show and does a great job on television and, covering the Fever and has been with us, she was on the color commentary for that television broadcast. Her son is on the Louisville team. He's a 5'11", 170-pound transfer. I don't think from a Division I school. I'd have to look where he's coming from. But essentially, he's a walk-on to Louisville. Got in the game, which was very cool. She was on the call for it. He matched the Indiana starting backcourt in points. He played 3 minutes of the game, and he matched Indiana's starting backcourt. Miles Rice, 1 of 11. Carlisle, 0 for 2. Got 2 shots. Mackenzie Mbako, 2 for 7. They got Mackenzie. All I hear about from Indiana fans, Mackenzie Mbako in practice, boy, he barely even touches the net. He's one of the best shooters in the country. They got him 7 shots.
Look, I hope this isn't a trend for the season. And when it's as bad of an effort performance and just getting outplayed left and right, there's no one that needs defending. But I will say, on paper, this is supposed to be a very talented weapon roster that Indiana has. If you continue to have nights like that, it's less on the individual performances and more on the story that's been the last 2 years, who is preparing them for these games, or maybe not preparing them for these games.
Look, tomorrow's Thanksgiving, right?
Indeed.
I don't care how good the ingredients are. I don't care if you're going to Market District and getting me the best possible produce, and then you're going to a fresh, nothing but organically fed turkey farm in Amish country to get me the best possible bird, and then you're going out and you're getting the absolute freshest of pumpkins with the best spice to be able to put inside your pumpkin pie, and your grandma's putting together the best possible crust.
Eddie, I'm sorry you went to all that work.
If you've got somebody as a cook that has no idea what the hell they're doing, it doesn't matter what ingredients you're giving them.
Yep.
And when you got a cook that's just standing there looking like the Swedish chef while his team's getting dunked out of the gym and you're down nearly 40, what are you going to do? And at some point you say to yourself, when you're bringing the same cook year in and year out, don't expect a different meal. But we'll talk Indiana from the football side next. By the way, they're redoing this movie. Did you know that?
What was that?
They're redoing this movie.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, starring the 2024 Indiana basketball team, calling it St. Elmo's Dumpster Fire.
Nice. Big budget movie, I think.
I mean, look, that's well played, right? They got a bunch of actors that they picked up from other movies, other lots, and they are going to be awesome. Just you wait. And I'm telling you what, wait until if you think the movie's good, wait till Gabe Cupps gets out there. I mean, that guy, the Oscar winner all the way around, right?
I thought for sure he was the understudy.
Joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that introduction. It doesn't make him feel uncomfortable at all. On the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line, but we're going to be talking about Indiana from a football standpoint. From Peaks.com, Matt Weaver joins us with the bucket game upon us between Indiana and obviously a night game with Purdue. Matt, I'm going to begin with this. If I'm looking at this from a standpoint of if there's any chance that Indiana loses style points in the bucket game that could help them in the playoff selection for a final push, I don't think that's going to be the case. But is there any chance, because of the fact it's now a night game and it may be actually really cold and even frosty a little bit, that Indiana, because Indiana to me is they're a pace team in football. I mean, like they almost feel like they're a dome team. They're like a fast on turf team, and I know that they can grind it out in the running game. If there's anything that Purdue's looking at to grasp at straws that would slow Indiana down, is that one of the things that could factor in a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be. I don't think precipitation or anything like that's supposed to be in the forecast, but it's supposed to be really cold. I want to say like wind chill of like maybe 10 degrees or something. And so, that obviously can make it a little tougher to grip the ball, to throw the ball. I would think Indiana, they've run the ball well. Even against Ohio State, they ran it pretty good, even though the offense overall was not good. And I would think you'd probably lean on that. I mean, they're still going to throw it because that's what Cignetti and Mike Shanahan want to do. But I think you lean on the run game maybe a little bit more, really try to pound them. But I agree with you. I mean, you need to win this in convincing fashion. I know the line is huge, like 29 points. I mean, I'm not saying you have to cover, but I think you need to get some style points to, keep yourself in that playoff picture.
Do you think there is an element of, and maybe I'm drinking too much Cignetti Kool-Aid here, but the, opening introduction at Assembly Hall when he's calling out Purdue and also calling out Ohio State and Michigan, 2 for 3 would be nice, but you talk about running up the score. You're right. The spread is a 29-point advantage favoring Indiana. I asked this earlier, do you expect this to be kind of like what Notre Dame did to Purdue earlier this year where it's like 66-7, or are there more pathways where this winds up being a closer game than we expect?
Well, I mean, you guys, I know Jake's been the Indiana-Purdue, it's like a lot of rivalry games. You can throw out the records, and usually Indiana's been the worst team, but I've seen games where you've had a bad Indiana team give a good Purdue team a heck of a game and vice versa. I think this one will. I think Cignetti will certainly try to make it that kind of game, like the Notre Dame game, like the Nebraska game. Those games where they pile it on because it's a rival. He wants to make a statement, and they've had, arguably their 2 poorest performance, especially on offense, in the last 2 games. And they got some humble pie, obviously, over in Columbus last week. So, I think he wants to end this on a bang. I think he wants to leave no doubt that they're a playoff team. And, Purdue's a team that they compete with on the recruiting trail for guys in state. So, there's a lot of things that go into this. And so you want to try to give them as big of a beatdown as you possibly can. So like I said, I think you try to run the ball. They're not going to stop what they do. Kirk Cignetti's not going to stop it. They're going to keep doing what they do. They're going to get, and I wouldn't be shocked if they came out in the first 10 plays on offense for passes. And I say run the ball. I could see them come out and chucking the ball all over the field to start their first offense possession because that's just that's what they do. But I think he's gonna keep his foot on the pedal for as long as possible.
Matt Weaver is our guest. Covers all things IU football for Peaks.com. Matt, for the College Football Playoff Committee, I felt like last night they made a statement with where they put Indiana. I feel very comfortable with where they're at. As you look at the rest of the college football landscape and what still has to play out, based on last night's ranking, how comfortable should IU fans be with the idea of Indiana being a college football playoff team?
I mean, I think you should feel pretty comfortable. I mean, one thing that was a little bit eye-opening for me was Clemson at 12. And I think they got bumped out once you brought in the Big 12 team. I think they got bumped down when they did the seeding. The other thing that could be a little bit of a fly in the ointment is if Texas A&M they host Texas this week. If they beat Texas, my understanding is they have the tiebreaker to go to the SEC championship. Georgia's already in. I know this is a long.
Sure, I know exactly where you're going with this.
If they beat Georgia, I think a three-loss Georgia team still gets in. That's my opinion.
Texas A&M carries Texas in with them, don't they?
Yeah, and I think Texas A&M and Texas get in.
Correct.
And then let's say assume Tennessee beats Vanderbilt. Somebody's going to get bent over. Let's be honest. Somebody's going to lose their spot, and it could be in Indiana. That's where I think that for that to happen, Texas A&M have to play two of their best games of the year, but it is possible. It is out there, so that's where it could get a little bit tricky for Indiana. I think what you do if you're Indiana, you go in this week, you pound Purdue, you beat them by as much as you can, and then hope everything kind of plays out in your favor like it did this past weekend, because they got a great deal of help this past weekend after they lost that Ohio State game.
So if you're an Indiana fan, and you tell me if you agree with this, Matt Weaver, Peaks.com, our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. The cheat sheet for Indiana is this. Assuming Indiana goes in, you want to win the bucket, right? You're rooting hard for Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and Texas this weekend, right? Because you want Texas A&M to lose. You want Tennessee to get beat by Vanderbilt and potentially get bounced, and you want South Carolina to beat Clemson. I don't think South Carolina has enough to vault. I don't think a Clemson win would vault South Carolina past Indiana, but I think Clemson, based on brand, if they were to beat South Carolina, might have enough to vault the one spot past Indiana. You agree with those three things?
I absolutely agree. I think you're right. South Carolina's they've had a good season, but I'm with you. I don't think they have enough to get in just with the win over Clemson. If Clemson beats them and beats them pretty handily, and then all those other they beat them handily, then you could be in a little bit of trouble. So like I said, but yeah, I think if it plays out the way you have it, I think Indiana's okay. I think they should feel pretty, assuming they take care of business Saturday night against Purdue.
As a sports writer, how tantalizing is the idea of a college football playoff matchup that pits Indiana against the Tom Allen defense in Penn State?
It would be there'd be a number of stories. Selfishly, I'm not looking forward to making that drive to Happy Valley in late December up in the mountains. But I would prefer South Bend because it would be a lot closer for me. But you know what? Just get it. Yeah, I've been saying this for the last couple of weeks. And this is all total new territory for us. I mean, this is something we've never had to deal with. And obviously the 12-team playoff's brand new. But just get an invitation to the party and let's go dancing and see what happens. You know what I mean? Anything can happen once you get in. Wherever you go play. I will say this about that Penn State matchup. Assume, obviously it's going to change. Those seedings are probably going to change. But if you would happen to win that game, you would have, I think, a matchup with Miami, if I remember the seeds right. To me, that's not the worst quarterfinal matchup for an Indiana. Miami's had a pretty good season. They can score. They really struggle defensively, but that wouldn't be the worst second round or quarterfinal matchup for Indiana. But obviously, I think the seeding will probably change a little bit, between now and it's final. But it would be interesting. I think the world of Coach Allen. He's a good friend of mine, has been for a number of years. He was great to me when he was here, and I wish him nothing but success. But it would be interesting for Indiana to go up against their former coach the year after he was let go.
Do you think Indiana has developed this year, Matt, enough cachet that Coach Cignetti, and I don't listen, I don't doubt in any way, shape, or form from a scheme standpoint and motivation standpoint that Kurt Cignetti's a hell of a coach. But in terms of building a roster, he was able to bring guys with him from James Madison. He had a lot of transfers in that regard. Now, in terms of building off of this, is Indiana going to be able to routinely complement via the transfer portal the recruits that they have coming in to sustain to this level? Or is there the chance that this was the 1 year ceiling and then after that really good, but not to this level?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I mean, listen, this is not an apples to apples comparison, but Mel Tucker came in at Michigan State and killed it in his first year with a bunch of transfers. And obviously take away the stuff off the field.
Right.
They started to slip on the field even before all that stuff happened. They got him in trouble. The next season they weren't as good. I think the difference is you have a track record. I mean, Mel Tucker had only been head coach for a couple of years. I think he had been at Colorado for 1 or 2 years before he got the Michigan State job. You've got a track record with Cignetti, and I know it's at lower levels, but the bottom line is if you go somewhere and you win with a bunch of guys that you didn't recruit and they were terrible before you came and they win immediately, that's coaching. That, to me, is the ultimate definition of coaching. I think they'll be fine. I think, in my opinion, Kurt Cignetti has raised the floor of Indiana football to a level I don't think it's ever been in my lifetime. I really believe that. Now, when it comes to recruiting, yeah, winning and success helps. But let's be honest, in today's day and age, I mean, I'm messaging with portal guys, and I'm hearing, yeah, my agent said they've reached out to me. Do you know, this is so weird. A college kid's telling me that Indiana coaches are reaching out to their agents. This is where you're at. If you can put together the deals, you're gonna have a good roster. Now, there's a bit of an unknown because you're bringing in a bunch of guys. I mean, mercenary may be too strong of a term, but you're bringing in a bunch of guys, and a lot of them are one-year dudes, and you've got to get these guys to mesh. It worked beautifully this year. Will it work like that every year? That's a bit of an unknown. I mean, that's a little bit of a risk, but I think a lot of teams are taking that risk, and hopefully over time you can have more of a base of a roster, if you know what I mean, instead of having to rely on the portal so much. He had to these first couple of years because the roster was gutted after last year. Hopefully going forward, you don't have to rely on the portal, but it's still going to be, in my opinion, 10, 12, maybe 15 guys a year.
Matt,
dudes are going to leave, and you're going to have to replace them.
For Indiana University, and I don't know the answer to that. I mean, that's why I'm asking. Are the NIL collective, the money that can be used to get players via the transfer portal or in recruiting in general for Indiana University, is it one athletic hopper, or are football and basketball totally different from one another in terms of the budget that they have?
I think there's two different budgets, and I'll be perfectly honest. I'll plead a little bit of ignorance. I mean, we don't know all the numbers. There's two collectives, Hoosiers for Good and then Hoosiers Connect, I think, and then there may be another one. The Hoosier Sterrett guys have one. But I think my understanding is, like, if you want to say, I want my money to go for football, or I want my money to go to basketball, you can do that. I mean, obviously I don't send money in, but I think that's something that you can do. But I think the pot, if you will, there's two different pots, one for basketball and one for football. And then, there's other athletes, women's basketball players, I think, get some, and I don't know how they allocate that. But, yeah, I think there are two separate pots, and I think the budget has been increased. I know Signetti's mentioned it multiple times. It's even more than they promised. I would think after this season it would be more. Hopefully it is, because you're going to need to keep, up with the Joneses, so to speak, if you want to stay competitive.
Peegs.com, where you can read all of the work. Indiana-Purdue bucket game and college football implication on Saturday, and then Matt will have it all covered. Matt, appreciate the time. Happy Thanksgiving.
You too, guys. Take care.
Matt Weaver joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Jimmy's got a ton of picks and plays of the day. I'm guessing we'll do it next.
The holiday weekend. But first, let's head for some Champions League. This getting underway in about 10 minutes. It's Liverpool versus Real Madrid. These are two of the best teams in the world facing off. I'm going to take Real Madrid as a tie, no bet. So if they draw with Liverpool in this game, you get your bet back. And if they win outright, you're cashing at plus 200. Juice.
Liverpool, you never walk alone, right?
That's
Isn't
true.
That's right.
That is true. Well done.
Do you like the Beatles?
I love the Beatles.
That's a new one. We haven't had you.
It was a different flavor to it, right?
Yeah.
I liked that. That was the soccer fan, Jake. That was.
Yeah, I guess so.
That was good.
We watched a game at Penny Lane.
Another bet tonight. This one is the last for both UConn and Dayton in the Maui Invitational. Tips off around midnight tonight. I will scoop the 7 on Dayton. The Dayton Flyers getting 7 against UConn.
What's the over-under on
evening.
Tex? Danny Hurley Tex.
2.5.
Probably.
Except he can only get 2, so that was stupid of me. Anyway, we'll shift gears towards Thanksgiving matchups. Not playing Lions and Bears. Lions are favored by 9. They probably cover that number, but it's a stay-away game for me. Rest of the Thanksgiving slate, I'll take the Cowboys to win outright over the New York Giants. I'll also take the Packers to win outright over the Miami Dolphins. The Friday game, Raiders at Chiefs. I've told you this for months. Kansas City does not cover numbers. The Raiders are getting 13. I'll scoop the 13 for the Las Vegas Raiders, though I do think Kansas City still wins outright. On Saturday, lay the 29 for Indiana. I would do that all the way up to about 35. I think they blow the doors off Purdue in a statement win for the Hoosiers. They solidify their spot in the college football playoff. As for the NFL slate on Sunday, I'll take the Cincinnati Bengals. I've been with them all season. This is do or die for them against the Steelers. I'll take them to win outright on the money line over Pittsburgh. Eddie, any plays for you on the long weekend?
I'm looking now. I'm trying to search different sports books to see if I can get a good odds here. Yeah, it's a little juice, but Jahmyr Gibbs anytime touchdown score, pretty much a lock for Detroit. David Montgomery's a little banged up, so is Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Gibbs has scored in all but one game this season, I want to say, so he's pretty much a virtual lock. And if you want to, you could parlay the two backs to get in because both of them have scored in all but one game.
Are we giving up for what it's worth? Because that's one I looked at. From your brief shop, are we giving up more than 200 or less than 200?
Less.
All right. That's a good one. I like that. Those are your plays of the extended day/weekend.
Jimmy, did you scoop the 17.5 last night on Colorado?
No, I laid it on UConn because I thought for certain they'd bounce back, and boy, did they not. More Dan Hurley anger, more frustration, and them now in the 7th place game against Dayton.
Dan Hurley's got to get it under control, man.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Bob Knight's one of the greatest of all time. He had 30 years, never really got it under control. John is in Brothers in
the back-to-back national titles help.
Is it Broad Ripple or downtown?
Broad Ripple.
Broad Ripple Brothers. Great location. John's going to be there. I watched Purdue and North Carolina State in the NCAA Final Four from that location. At that time, they had one of my favorite beers on draft, but I realized he's going to be there talking it up and getting you set for the weekend that is of both college and professional football. You folks have a wonderful Thanksgiving. A reminder, we will not be with you, obviously, on Friday or tomorrow, so we will be talking to you next on Monday and talking about the Colts' thrilling 17-10 win that they're going to get in New England. Wonderful weekend to all of you, and enjoy the IHSAA state finals as well. We'll be back with you at noon on Monday. Thanks for listening to Query & Company.